worry is that we're allowing the thinking of the 1970s and 1980s to inform our forward momentum today, when in fact we have much, much bigger opportunity. We'll step back and unleash that imagination, ask bigger questions. For example, the lights here, a number of them look to be compact fluorescents, which are great. They may be, compared to what could be done if we imagined 100% efficiency, about 7% energy efficient. We've got a long, long way to go. LEDs are the next generation. The more efficient LEDs may take us up to about 18% efficiency with lighting. We've got a long, long way to go. Yes, we have to be practical. We have to do what we can today, but we have to do it in ways that open up future possibilities rather than lock down and prevent new things from emerging. So it's in that spirit I want to talk a bit about the opportunity. In that regard, physicist John Wheeler, actually is an astrophysicist. He died not too many years ago, but was one of the professors of Richard Feynman. In the 1970s, I remember him responding to questions by reporters. How the heck are you guys coming up with some of those weird notions? No, he wasn't a behavioralist, but he was a very informed physicist. And you may not know him, except by the phrase he coined. He's one of the people who coined the phrase black hole, a very innovative thinker. And he responded simply to reporters, we shape the world by the questions we ask. And there is indeed the need to ask much more profound, much more richer, much more imaginative questions than we've ever had before. And with that in mind, Paul invited a number of us, the IEA, to an amazing place in Zealandia that actually caught me by surprise. I felt at once intrigued and a little bit melancholy. Intrigued that people in New Zealand have established a habitat like this to restore the robustness of what existed as an ecosystem before humanity arrived on the island. Melancholy because that we even had to do something like that really gave rise to a heartfelt moment of caution and thought. So in that regard, I told Paul yesterday, I'm dedicating this talk here today to the moa, the auk, and to the passenger pigeon. All of them made extinct because of our activities, peoplekind. The passenger pigeon is remarkable. At one time in the 1800s, 3 to 5 billion birds made extinct because we thought of them as cheap food. That's over 50 pigeons per person that existed at that point in time in the United States history. The last pigeon died in 1914, 100 years ago, in the Cincinnati Zoo. Martha was her name. We have done some incredible damage to this world, and we need to step back and think how to be moving in a different capacity. So in that regard, I might remind you that in geologic terms, we were formerly in what's called the Holocene period of the Cenozoic era. But for very good reasons, many are now suggesting that we are deep into the Anthropocene. Not good news. Not good news because we're beginning to think about renaming the period we're in precisely because of the huge damages we are creating, both in terms of our climate, our environment, and a bit of our economy as well. So in that regard, I'm suggesting that we are now living off the very diminishing returns of the second industrial revolution. And what we absolutely must be thinking about is kicking into what my colleague Jeremy Rifkin calls the third industrial revolution, lifting up to a higher level because we're pulling together some of the things we've already heard about, new information technologies that inform, enable, that manage our resources to a much higher level of productivity, absolutely necessary if we're to see a robust economy continue. It is not just about climate. Unfortunately, we've gotten ourselves into the position where we need to solve for climate and a better economy together. We cannot do one without the other. And in that sense, instead of economic activity based on supply-side perspective, we absolutely need to immediately act on the economic imperative of energy efficiency. And there is indeed a very real need to talk about the implications and the huge opportunity to learn about this and turn this all around to our long-term, our sustainable advantage. How has humanity impacted the world? I think it's sobering to take a step back and think about this. Human activity has transformed between 1/3 and 1/2 of the land surface of this planet. That is a stunning accomplishment of not very good proportions. Fertilizer plants produce more nitrogen than is fixed naturally by all terrestrial ecosystems. Huge impact. Fisheries remove more than 1/3 of the primary production of the ocean's coastal waters. That is not sustainable. Humans use more than 1/2 of the world's readily available fresh water runoff. What do we leave the rest of the ecosystems if we're consuming at such huge quantities on an annual basis? And my favorite as a resource economist, Since the Industrial Revolution, humans have dumped the weight equivalent of 1 trillion cars of carbon dioxide emissions into our global atmosphere. 1 trillion cars, weight equivalent of CO2 since the Industrial Revolution. That is not at all good. It doesn't take much expertise as a chemist to know that we're doing some huge damage. So the question, other than population, what may be the single largest contributor to environmental degradation? I suggest the answer is large-scale and inefficient use of energy. Now, Mike's alluded to it. We think that New Zealand is really moving ahead progressively because of renewables, but when you conclude and include the heat and the transport, you're going to see a different picture emerge. The United States, in fact, wastes 86% of all the energy we consume with the economic process. And the indicators are, I haven't done the numbers for New Zealand, but I've been able to find a few indicators suggesting that New Zealand may have a similar level of inefficiency. In other words, 14% of all the energy in the aggregate is all the efficiency that we're wangling out of this thing we call energy. The result is a magnitude of waste that imposes a very large array of costs that severely constrains the economic process. The conclusion I would reach, and I hope we will at the end of this discussion in the next 2 days, the most immediate opportunity to ensure a more robust and a more sustainable economy is to quadruple or better the 14% level of energy inefficiency, I might suggest. But I've done a thought experiment for New Zealand. How does this affect the economy overall? And I'm looking at data from the OECD, looking at historically 1990 to about the current time, and then looking forward as they're examining what the future may hold for the developed countries of the world, including New Zealand, after the year 2040. And you can see immediately that the New Zealand economy is beginning to get weaker and weaker and weaker in ways that we may not notice. And I'm suggesting that, again, like the United States, New Zealand appears to be just 14% energy inefficient. And this inefficient use of energy, I'm suggesting, imposes a huge array of costs. Now, that wonderful chart that Mike put up there, I'm very familiar with that with the IEA, the multiple benefits efficiency, if we're not being incredibly more efficient, those potentially benefits become huge damages and costs. And it's that huge array of damages and costs that are clamping down on the robustness of our productivity as an economy. We're going to be seeing a weaker and weaker economy. I've done a thought experiment. Admittedly, it is a thought experiment. But I've looked and said, what if New Zealand were to perform at the level 1990 through 2007, when there was a little bit of robustness there, just 0.3% difference in terms of productivity. By 2040, we might be imagining 180,000 more jobs for New Zealanders because of that higher level of performance. And we might imagine about $8 billion a year more in the way of either investment opportunities or government revenues or programs to support the social, educational, climate programs that we think are critical to our well-being. So a little bit more productivity through greater use of efficiency could have long-term and significant, positively significant benefits, but we need to step back and ask much better questions. Or as colleagues of mine, a couple of German quick sketch artists, I gave a talk in New Zealand a year ago, and they did this. We've got the idea of the 86% whites. Imagine our economy, whether New Zealand or the US, being the 14% figure there, having to carry the burden of the 86% waste. There is no way, with that kind of a burden imposed on us, that we can be nimble, agile, or even productive. We need to begin thinking about how to turn those numbers around big time. So a big thought on the tough choices ahead, and this is part of the dilemma that we're confronted with. We're still thinking mostly through the lens of the 1980s views. We need to be looking forward to the 21st century, well into the future. But my colleague, Dr. Jeff Luke, who passed away some years ago, unfortunately because of early cancer, wrote a book in 1998 called The Catalytic Leadership Strategies for an Interconnected World. He noted, and this is exactly spot on, I think you'll agree, individuals have a natural tendency to choose from what he called an impoverished option bag. Cognitive research and problem solving shows that individuals usually generate about 30% of the total number of potential options on simple problems. On average, individuals miss about 70 to 80% of the potential high-quality alternatives. In other words, we're too quickly overwhelmed. We step back and try to grab for the easy instead of opening up the imagination and exploring new ways to get the job done and really taking advantage of that full opportunity. It's not unlike the picture of the iceberg. And I'm asking the question, are we really living more by waste than real ingenuity at scale. So we have that 14% inefficiency, framing, filtering, constraining our ability to imagine the future. So we think about efficiency, this is where we're thinking, at the top of the iceberg. When in fact, if we step back, not enough time to talk about all the wonderful things we could be doing, but a study I did with my colleagues at the American Council for Energy Efficient Economy, we found that the U.S. had the full energy efficiency equivalent to 250 billion barrels of oil. 250 billion barrels of efficiency equivalent through the year 2050 that we're not likely to tap unless we go get it. There will be some normal improvements, but this is untapped resource unless we specifically understand that resource is there, set up the policy investment frameworks to go get it. That's sufficient for the U.S. to reduce its total energy use by half. And I asked the question, how much might we imagine for New Zealand by the year 2030 and 2050? I leave you with that question. And there's the study where you can tap and find it if you'd like. Are others acting on these ideas? Well, I'm here to bring you a bit of good news. I'm working with colleagues in Untitled Chapter. This is a region in northeastern France, up along the Belgian border and the English Channel. About 4 million people, just a little bit smaller than New Zealand. A former coal mining region, no longer mining coal. Hint, hint. Still heavy industry, however. And they've asked us to work with them. And working with my colleague Jeremy Rifkin again, and our partners in the Paris office at Accenture, we developed a master plan for the third industrial revolution I mentioned very briefly. We suggested that we had the wherewithal, that region of France, the right set of policies, the right set of behaviors, the right set of directed investments, purposeful effort, if you will, could reduce total energy use by more than half by 2050. And all remaining energy needs provided then by renewable energies of all stripes. The plan, here's the scary part, anticipates average annual investments on the order of 6 billion euro a year over the next 36 years. But they did not back down. They did not allow that daunting number to hold them back. The Chamber of Commerce, on board with this fully, and in fact, partner of funding the study that Jeremy and Accenture did, hired a director of finance to set about how to begin finding that scale of money. So rather than backing down, they move forward. It's exactly the same spirit we need to think about. If my numbers are to be believed, that kind of investment, that kind of return, that kind of robustness may provide as many as 165,000 new jobs by the year 2050. 100,000 on average each year, but rising steadily, so by 2050, 165,000 jobs. I'm delighted to say this master plan was formally delivered and unanimously accepted by the Regional Council and the Chamber of Commerce in the World Forum for Responsible Economy in Lille on October 25th. So some concluding thoughts. What might be our ultimate economic and energy efficiency resource? Well, recalling, and no laughter here, recalling the comment of early 20th century UK essayist Lionel Strachey, who commented, "Americans guess because they're in too great a hurry to think." Does New Zealand want to be caught with that stigma? I don't think so. Or Jerry Hirschberg, founder and former CEO of Nissan Design for car bodies and the like, noted that creativity is not an escape from disciplined thinking, it is an escape with disciplined thinking. And Henry Ford, not always my favorite character, but said it in a very smart way. Thinking is the hardest work there is, which is the probable reason why so few people engage in, so many people go to the mall to go shopping. Right? Or as my favorite American philosopher, Gary Larson, with apologies to the mothers and fathers in the audience, I am a father. A couple of spiders have woven a big web across the bottom of the playground slide. If we pull this off, we'll eat like kings. Or more formally, as Maynard Keynes said in the foreword of his book, The General Theory, the difficulty lies not with the new ideas, but in escaping the old ones. Or, as my quick sketch artist friends have characterized it, the difficulty, however hard it may seem, is to use our imagination, to use our desire to improve upon this world of ours, and to escape the old ideas. Thank you very much.
Questions for Skip?
I just want to make a comment which is reasonably obvious to most people in this room. But one of the problems with term energy efficiency is very kind of vague and it can be interpreted in many, many ways. I think you presented an overly optimistic kind of view of the amount of savings that could be made from energy efficiency. When you say, for example, 86% of energy is waste, laws of thermodynamics will tell you that energy will always be wasted, and even if you do things in the most perfect kind of fashion, you can never achieve 100%. For example, the upper thermodynamic limit for an engine might be 60% or something like that. So the fact that the engines are currently 30% or something else isn't that bad. So just some kind of feedback, commentary on that kind of issue.
Yeah, happy to comment on that because I think you're dead wrong. I think you are still stuck in the 1980s view, if I might suggest.
So the laws of thermodynamics?
I am very aware of the laws of thermodynamics, and let me suggest I've been working with my colleague, if you know the name, Robert Ayres, considered by many to be one of the godfathers of industrial ecology, whereas most economists, for example, say you take a little bit of capital, meaning investment, a little bit of labor, you've got a recipe for the economy. Bob and I would say you've got to have, yes, capital labor, but if you don't pay attention to the energy and material flows, they can actually constrain capital labor and be less productive. Bob has got a very good book out with one of his former graduate students, now Professor Benjamin Ware, on exactly this point for the United States and for Japan. They've looked exactly at what we call not energy, but exergy. We're really focused on the high quality available energy compared to the unavailability of energy elsewhere in the economy. So when you and I use the term energy here, what we're really talking about is exergy. And what Bob has determined, and I've extended this work, is that when you really look at the work that needs to be done, we may be hugely inefficient. Let me give you this example. 1 joule of energy is perhaps enough energy to lift a medium-sized apple about 1 meter off the ground. If I were to do it, it takes about 20 joules of effort. 20 joules of effort to do 1 joule of work. Why? Because it takes energy to keep me alive, energy to go to my brain, my heart, my lungs, my kidneys, and I'm not a particularly efficient skeletal muscle converter of energy into work. So 20 joules of effort for maybe 1 joule of work. Now, if I want to double that joule, double the apple, if I want you to have an apple, to get that amount of energy, I need 2 joules. That's actual work that has to be accomplished. So yes, I need to use more energy. But it doesn't necessarily mean I need 40 joules of effort, because I might be in better shape, we might find a lever, you and I might quit quibbling over it and fighting each other, dissipating energy to no end whatsoever. By the time you really step back and look at the work that can be done, just as Richard Feynman suggested, plenty of room at the bottom. There is much more physically we can do if we'll open up and begin asking better questions and really examining the physical world around us and then integrating a better sense of how to inspire, how to motivate the behavioral change necessary to accomplish it. So it's not saying that it's automatic, it's not saying it's guaranteed. It is saying that if we value this world of ours, and if we want to be able to have a positive effect on both the environment, the ecosystems broadly, maintaining some future moa, some future auk, some future passenger pigeon that may not be here if we don't take these actions, we absolutely need to ask bigger and bolder questions than we're allowing ourselves to do. In that sense, we may take a few steps smaller today, and we may not get to those levels of efficiency. You're right, we're never going to get to 100% efficiency. But right now our life is on average just a couple percent, single-digit efficiency around the world. We could be moving up to 30, 40, 50% efficiency. Asymptotically never approaching 100, but we could imagine 30, 40, 50% efficiency absolutely if we'll open up thinking and begin asking and begin demanding better questions and better actions in that regard. So it's in that spirit I'm offering.
Well, and I buy into that spirit, but beware of the thermodynamic limits and don't overstate. You use the term exergy, if that's what you're actually referring to, and it's probably a more useful concept. Energy is something quite different. Exergy, I think, is probably a more valuable kind of concept.
Yeah, and my only point is that we have never really sat back and asked what it really takes to accomplish a unit of work. We've always approached it from a supply problem, saying, we need more supply, we need more oil, we need natural gas, maybe big renewables and so forth. We've always thought of efficiency as a way to cost effectively and nicely reduce a few emissions, save a few dollars, or to manage the growth and demand for energy until the big solutions come along. But in all of our history, we have never really stepped back and asked what it means to accomplish work either as a society or as an economy, and understood how to really extract maximum value out of the thing we call exergy, or that we could call energy for our purposes here today. And that's the point. We need to step back. You and I might, in 2 years, converge on a different number. But I'll guarantee it'll be a bigger number than we're using today to shape our policy and our thinking.
One more question, Skip will be...
Yeah, I'm thinking of a practical example of the sort of thing you've been talking about, in terms of it's 10 times better not to make a journey than to make a journey in a car that's 10% more efficient.
Yes.
And the way of achieving that is conference calls instead of face-to-face meetings. Is that the sort of thinking that you're alluding to?
Yeah, it is. It's, that would be a good example. In fact, one of the best discussions and interactions I had ever was in Stockholm, Sweden, but I was in Washington, D.C. 2 hours of a very lively discussion using exactly that kind of a system you're talking about. Save wear and tear on me, reduce the amount of jet fuel I had to use, and obviously emissions. Hugely productive, hugely productive. At the same time, I'm recalling, I've had the pleasure of doing some work with a colleague, Ivan Illich, that some of you may know, a social critic back in the 70s or so, 80s, unfortunately no longer with us. But he wrote a book called Energy and Equity that I might suggest. And one of the theses of that book was, he said, if we assume a person can go from point A to point B in a car in 10 minutes, quite apart from congestion, that person is better off than a bicyclist who may take 30 minutes. But then Illich asked the question, wait a minute, we actually may drive 10,000 miles a year, updating his numbers, working to pay for the car, going to court over it, looking for parking spaces, repairing the car, even before we think about all the time we've got to devote to making sure we've got highways and light traffic systems and policemen helping us guide those cars through. We may spend 1,500 to 2,000 hours a year to go 10,000 miles. Our social rate of speed, therefore, is only 5 to 6 miles an hour. So to the extent that the mayor and others can get there a little bit longer, maybe on a bicycle, they're devoting less of their time and energy to getting there, more time to be with their family and friends, more time to do the things they really want to do in their life, and it's a much better approach. So I agree with you. We need to stepping back and asking better questions about the impact, not only directly, but time is an element, and how to use time better that enables us not to have to feel like we've got to own a car to get there more quickly, when in fact it's slowing us down in so many other ways indirectly.
Thank you very much, Skip. I'd like just to thank all our 3 keynote speakers, our opening keynote speakers. That was a fantastic start to the conference. Just a huge amount to think about and talk about. So let's do some talking over coffee and refreshments out in the foyer area. And there will be a bell rung, I believe, Jess, and we'll liaise as to how long we give people to call you back in here. Enjoy some refreshments, and thank you, everybody.